here in New York. Jason Friedman is a former prosecutor. You know him well. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning.
Good morning. You know, for all the cases we see of defendants saying, I'm not guilty, the police planted evidence, usually we say, oh, yeah, sure, sure. Tell it to the judge. I mean, we usually look at those cases, you know, with a cynical eye. In this case, it looks like it's true.
That's right, Lisa, and you have to give law enforcement some credit here. Obviously, they executed the search warrants. They had probable cause to search the Davis's home based upon the statements that were made by Mr. Reeves. But you have to give them a little credit for not getting too narrow-minded and too much tunnel vision, just focusing on Mr. Davis. And look what happened as a result. And
Jason, you'd think that if Reeves is a former law enforcement officer, which he was, instead of just leaving the pipe bombs there and calling law enforcement, he might take them out himself. I mean, this is a very dangerous situation. This is a teenage boy who's maybe going to take them to school or do God knows what. To me, it's a little suspicious that he leaves them there.
Definitely. You know, he can maybe argue that he didn't want to disturb anything for fear of setting them off.
Yeah.
Plus, we're talking about more than one. We're also talking about more than one here.
Yeah, all right. Well, he seems like he would know how to handle them. Okay, so that's interesting. And Jason Friedman, it sounds to me, based on the opening statements yesterday, that the defense is going to stick to the position that the pipe bombs were not planted, and in fact that this teenager was the owner and the possessor of those pipe bombs.
That's right, Lisa, and they're going to point to the police department. They're going to say, listen, you had the right guy all along, and you went on this extraneous fishing expedition looking someplace else, and really you had the right defendant the whole time. I
mean, I guess that's the only defense he has, but it seems to me to really be going after this family, given that he's got the evidence on his computer, the internet searches, the anarchist cookbooks, the PVC in his home. Is that a defense that you think is going to prevail?
I wouldn't feel too confident if I was the defense attorney, no question about it, Lisa. Not to mention, if he's going to take the witness stand and offer explanations, his prior criminal convictions most likely are going to come in.
Would you put him on the stand?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Too much to lose, too much at risk here to put him on the stand, not only from the facts of this case, but as I mentioned, his prior criminal convictions clearly are going to be heard by the jury.
Well, but Jason, you know, it's his right to take the stand. As the defendant, you can tell him as the attorney it's not a good idea. All those criminal convictions are going to come in. You got a lot of splaining to do, but he could say, I hear you. I reject your advice. This is my right. I'm the one on trial. I want to take the stand, and then you got to let him, right?
That's right, Lisa. Keep in mind, the clients really are the employer, and the attorney is the employee. The best you can do is give your advice, your recommendations as an experienced, seasoned defense attorney, but ultimately, with all attorneys, it comes down to what the client's wishes are. They have the rights to make the decisions, especially in a criminal case, where it's their liberty squarely at risk here.
Yeah, but we used to say the clients can really get in the way of the effective practice of law.
Extreme extent.
And Jason Friedman, as a former prosecutor yourself, what's it like for law enforcement to go after one of their own? Because this is a former reserve sheriff's deputy who's now in the defense seat.
It's always difficult for law enforcement to go after one of their own, although I suspect in this case they really don't view it that way for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was only, it was remote in time. It was over 10 years ago. Yeah. And he's a so-called bad apple at this point. He has criminal convictions. In fact, his deputy license was stripped altogether. So I don't think this is the classic case of police-on-police prosecution.
Yeah, I mean, and Dr. Robbie Court, I'm Lisa Bloom. The disturbing discovery of pipe bombs in a Florida family's home resulted in the arrest of 18-year-old Scott Davis, Jr. Former Sheriff's Deputy Scott Reeves was the one who reported the family to police. But after further investigation, police released Davis, and Reeves ends up facing criminal charges. So now he's on trial in an Orlando courtroom accused of setting up the teen, and there's a brief break in those court proceedings. So let me go to Jason Friedman, former prosecutor, who's with us. You know, this raises the question in my mind, how common is it that law enforcement plants evidence, really?
Well, it depends on which side of the fence you're on, Lisa. There are a lot of people who claim that law enforcement does it all the time, but the reality, I think, objectively, it doesn't happen very often at all. And keep in mind, this is not, Mr. Reeves is not a current employed law enforcement officer. It's not like he was wearing his uniform, had his gun and his badge, and went into a premises and planted evidence. He's 10 years removed from having anything to do with the sheriff's office, so it's a little bit different than your traditional police officer planting evidence.
All those facts are definitely true, but you know, it just strikes me because we've heard so many cases where people say law enforcement planted evidence, and more often in a drug case, for example, where that's very commonly the defense. And I think most of us look at at those claims as, oh, come on, it's probably not true. What else are you going to say? You're caught red-handed. You're caught with the illegal substance on you or in your car. But to me, this case is an indication that it certainly is possible, and it does happen sometimes, and we have to investigate all of these types of claims.
There's no question about it, and that's why you do have to give the law enforcement officers credit here, because a lot of times what happens is, the law enforcement, the police officers arrest somebody based upon probable cause, and they really don't look elsewhere. They decide you're the guy, and they're going to point all their fingers at you and go at you very hard. Here you do have to give a little credit to them, because they did take a step back in the days following the initial searches and looked at the big picture. Obviously, the investigation took a different direction, and look where we are now.
And Dr. Robbie, Jason Friedman, he's facing a maximum of life in prison. That's a pretty significant sentence, given that, after all, nobody was hurt here, thank goodness.
No question about it, and I think that's just the maximum he can face if he's convicted on the top count, all the charges. The reality is that even if he is convicted, I would doubt that the judge would sentence him to that period of time.
Even with his priors?
It's up to the judge. There's some discretion in sentencing. It's up to the judge. If I can just comment on why the pipe bomb, though, that question, I think it's because he knew that if he reported a pipe bomb or planted a pipe bomb, the reaction by law enforcement would be overwhelming, as it was, rather than saying, yeah, I saw he had some drugs in the house, or he had some other type of illegal substance that might not have generated that type of response from law enforcement. I think he wanted to make his point firmly and quickly, which is why he chose the pipe bomb.
I think you're right, and I think we're also concerned about terrorism. Law enforcement is always on